In the winter of 1893, under a sky perpetually gray with ash and secrets, a lone scholar named Alaric Deschamps arrived at the forgotten village of Virels in northern France. The roads were frostbitten veins, winding through forests stripped bare of leaves, leading to a place no longer marked on any map. Alaric had not come as a pilgrim nor as a traveler, but as a man haunted by a whisper, one he first heard in the musty archives of the National. Buried within the memoir of a mad priest, excommunicated in 1741, the memoir spoke of a temple, not of stone, but of silence. A place said to exist beneath the ruins of an abbey razed during the wars of religion, where voices from the dead echoed not through words, but through the breath of those still living, until he found the drawings. The priest had called it La Chambre Morte, the dead room. Alaric, a man trained in reason, dismissed the notion as allegory. The room at the bottom was exactly as the drawings foretold, an oval chamber lined with bas-reliefs of open mouths and hollow eyes. At its center, a circular stone platform stained with concentric rings, like water dried upon blood, scribbled in ink made from ash and what appeared to be dried blood. The drawings depicted a narrow stairwell descending into a chamber of impossibly intricate geometry walls etched with looping sigils, resembling both musical notations and anatomical cross-sections. Nothing happened. Not a whisper, not a draft, not even the echo of his own breath. But then just before midnight, he felt something. No one spoke to him, save a girl no older than 12, who tugged at his coat and said simply, "Don't listen after midnight." Beneath the altar, half buried in soot and vines, was the entrance. A circular hatch made not of wood or iron but of something waxy and pale flesh-like in texture. It bore no lock, only a pattern of indentations shaped eerily like fingertips. Her lips moved in a lullaby long forgotten by his conscious mind. Then others joined in. Dozens. Hundreds. Voices upon voices layered in dissonant harmony. The chamber pulsed. The mouths on the walls wept dust. And in the center of the room, now carved in bone-white stone, was a symbol not present the night before. A circle pierced by a crooked key. And from within his own throat Alaric spoke. But he did not leave the village. The air grew warm, sweet, then cold. So suddenly cold it burned, and her voice it turned. When Alaric pressed his hand to it, the hatch sighed and opened. His final letter, dated 3 weeks after the incident, ended abruptly with a scrawl. They speak when no one listens. They sing when no one breathes. These images appeared again and again in the margins of unrelated tomes across centuries. A 12th century, Monk's diary, a Renaissance astronomer's rejected, manuscript, even a page torn from an 18th century grimoire, anonymously deposited in the catacombs of Paris. They all drew the same room. And so Alaric came to Virels, found the village nearly empty, save for a few withered souls who watched him through cracked shutters. On the third day, Alaric found the abbey. Its stones were cold as bone, blackened by time and something older. The staircase spiraled downward. He descended, lantern flickering in the air that grew heavier with each step, as though centuries of sorrow clung to the walls. But what struck Alaric most was the silence. It was not the silence of emptiness, but a silence that listened. For hours, he sat in that chamber, sketching the symbols and taking notes. It was not sound. Not exactly. It was memory. Alaric saw his mother's face. Not as she was in her final illness, but as she had once been singing to him in the orange light of a fireplace. The lullaby warped, slowed, then reversed each syllable, unraveling like veins in ice. But the words were not his. They wait in the breath between seconds. They see through the skin of silence. The temple remembers. He awoke on the floor at dawn, bleeding from both ears, his journal pages soaked in ink he did not remember spilling. Alaric fled the chamber that day. Something in him had changed. He wrote to his colleagues begging for help, but received no replies. He was never seen again. In the temple, it sealed itself. 71 years later, in the spring of 1964, letter arrived at the Department of Folklore and Occult Traditions at the University of Leiden. It bore no return address. It's only a seal of a crooked key inside a circle, exactly as described in Alaric Deschamps' final journal entry. Inside was a single sheet of yellowing parchment. On it, a phrase written in Latin, trembling and uneven, as though inked by a hand already gripped by rigor mortis. Quis aus cultibit, audiet. Quis spirebit, loceter. He who listens shall hear. He who breathes shall speak. The letter would have been dismissed as the ramblings of a lunatic. It had not come accompanied by a roll of microfilm containing scanned copies of Alaric's original journal. These were thought lost to time. But here they were, page after page of maddening glyphs, impossible architecture. In drawings so precise they seemed etched into the very grain of the paper. And in one image, faint, like a shadow not cast by light, was a figure, hooded, kneeling, its face obscured, its hands outstretched to the central platform as if praying or pleading, and among them photographs, grainy black and white, but undeniable. The photographs showed the chamber, exactly as described. The mouths on the walls, the concentric rings, the grotesque reliefs twisted in perpetual agony. Dr. Margareta Voss, then a rising authority in religious anthropology, was the first to take interest. She was drawn not by the supernatural, but by the pattern, the recurrence of the temple motif in unrelated cultures, across continents, in millennia. Locals turned away, spat at her feet, or made signs against evil when she passed. But one old man, eyes milk-white with cataracts, whispered to her over a bowl of broth in the tavern, not the violent kind, but slow, crawling like disease. In the dream, she stood in the chamber, though she had never seen it in person. Voices came not from the walls, but from inside her lungs. Each breath she exhaled carried a sentence she had not lived. In Mesopotamia, she found mention of the House of Listening Bones. In pre-dynastic Egypt, a temple dedicated not to gods, but to voices of the unburied. In the Himachal hills of northern India, a forbidden shrine where monks were trained not to meditate, but to empty themselves, so that something else might enter. The symmetry was unnerving. When her fingers traced the indentations, the surface pulsed, as if recognizing its own bloodline. It opened. At the center of the floor was now an object, a mask. She heard nothing and everything, the thoughts of the dead. Not just recent ones, ancient, forgotten, whole civilizations. The screams of children sacrificed in sunless caverns. The final words of queens whose names were buried by empire. The laughter of men whose bones had been ground into mortar for cathedrals. But behind closed doors, a movement began. Letters, meetings, codes, embedded in academic journals. Margareta had become something else, high priestess perhaps, though she never called herself such. Carved from bone, smoothed by time, featureless except for 2 eye slits and a mouth lined with silver teeth, each etched with tiny runes. Margareta believed that all these temples were iterations of one source, one origin point that had metastasized through time and geography, cloaked in different faiths but preserving the same blueprint. A chamber, a chant, and the belief that the dead could speak through the living if silence was pierced in just the right way. She traveled to Virals under a false name. The village, now barely more than a scattering of stone homes and sheep paths, was hostile to outsiders. "Do not dig where the ground forgets," he rasped. "Memory grows like rot down there." That night she dreamt of fire. When she awoke, her pillow was soaked in black saliva. On the 3rd day, she found it. Just as Alaric described, hidden beneath the abbey ruins, sealed by an entrance that felt less like stone and more like flesh mimicking permanence. She descended. The room had not changed, dustless, timeless, the same concentric platform, the same walls of anguished mouths, but something had shifted. She did not know why, but she placed it on her face, and the world split. Margareta felt herself leave her body, not upward, but sideways, as though she slid between layers of reality like paper peeling from glue. Then she heard her own voice, not as it had ever been, but as it would be. It spoke. "We are not a cult. We are a choir. We do not worship. We remember. We are the temple, and the temple is us." When she tore the mask off, the chamber was empty again. She left Virals before dawn. 6 months later, she published nothing. She resigned her post, vanished from academic circles. She simply said, "I listened long enough. Now I must speak. And those who listened, they began to speak too. They called themselves the Choir of Hollow Breath. It's not in public, never in print, but in whispers. The kind carried between candlelit rooms and marginalia in banned books. Over the next 2 decades, Margaretta's followers multiplied, though they never congregated. There were no temples, no altars, no manifestos, and in each of them, the sigils, the mouths, the mask, replicated exactly, though never touched by the same hand twice. Only rooms, identical in design, appearing in basements, attics, abandoned buildings, each one echoing the chamber beneath Varels. The choir recruited not through faith, but through grief. Only those hollowed by death were drawn to it. Widowers, orphans, parents with cribs that never rocked again. Pain was the door, and silence was the key. It's always the same shape, always the same stone. It was as if the architecture had migrated like a parasite. No one claimed responsibility for building them. Some chanted in forgotten tongues. Others screamed lullabies they had never heard. One man painted the entire surface of his skin with a map he said led to the origin of sound. Some were found half buried under modern construction. Others were hidden behind false walls in centuries-old churches. He called these places listening rooms. One editor gouged out his own ears with a fountain pen. Another was found dead in his office, lungs filled not with water but with ash. To enter, one had to be initiated, not by rite, but by rupture. But every mirror shattered and every clock stopped at the same time. 3:19 a.m. Nurses reported she never slept, never blinked, and never aged beyond the photograph on her admission papers. Her final words, recorded on a nurse's notepad, though never spoken aloud, were, once inside, each member underwent a ritual known only as the echoing. It was never documented. But survivors, few as they were, described a moment when breath no longer felt theirs, and language detached from logic. Many never spoke again. It is wherever a voice goes unanswered. Some disappeared entirely. But left running in total darkness, listeners reported vibrations behind their eyes, dreams stitched together from voices not their own, and in some cases, possession. A woman in Kyoto entered a coma with no known cause, only to wake 6 days later reciting the death chants of the Etruscans, a language she had never studied. By 1977, French police investigated 6 cases of mass vanishing families found in homes meticulously clean. Dinner still warm on the table, anywhere silence lingered long enough for a whisper to take root. One former choir member, later confined to a secure asylum, claimed the group had learned to transmit their rituals through magnetic tape. In each location, beneath floorboards or within closets, investigators found markings, circles, crooked keys, and sometimes bone masks, carved into plaster, fused to the walls, like tumors. The media never caught on. Those who tried to publish were silenced, not by threat, but by madness. Journalists began hallucinating voices in white noise. The memo ended with a single directive typed in red. The cult did not kill, it remembered, violently, had become a contagion. Margaretta died in 1981, or so it is believed. Her last known location was a nursing home in Bruges, and that in stillness, in unbearable grief, that sentence could be continued by others. The dead did not cry out for peace. They begged to be remembered, word for word, syllable for syllable, breath for breath. Abandoned churches there began to resonate at odd frequencies. Locals said they could hear children crying inside, but when they broke open the doors, there was nothing but air, sometimes a mask. The temple has no walls. After her death, the choir scattered, but they did not vanish. Instead, they embedded into universities, funeral parlors, psychiatric clinics, cassettes. They called them vocal relics. Played backward, the tapes emitted no discernible sound. A college student in Berlin reportedly stabbed himself mid-lecture, drawing the crooked key into his abdomen. It was no longer a cult, philosophy disguised as pathology, one that believed death was not the end, but merely the last breath of a longer sentence. And the choir answered. By 1993, sightings of listening rooms increased in Eastern Europe, particularly in post-war zones where mourning was abundant. Sarajevo, Grozny, Bucharest, The United Nations dismissed it as post-traumatic hallucination. But within certain circles, unease grew. An internal memo from Interpol, never made public, identified 34 locations across 11 countries, showing architectural anomalies consistent with non-standard ritual use. Do not enter if alone. Do not breathe if the air is warm. And then, silence. The choir stopped. No new sightings, no new whispers. As if the entire belief had breathed its final note, exhaled into nothing. Until the tape. The one that surfaced in 2004? It was online for 41 minutes before being removed. Her final post, captured by a web crawler, read, "You are already listening. The question is, when will you begin to speak?" Clara vanished that same night. All that was left in her apartment was a tape recorder still running, capturing silence. But when investigators analyzed the recording, they found something impossible. The final waveform, its peaks and valleys, was not random, formed a spiral, a perfect spiral of sound. The same shape carved into the walls of every listening room, the same spiral etched into Etienne's skin, same spiral drawn in ash by Alaric Deschamps in 1893. And now you've heard it too, because in the end, that's all the choir ever needed, not followers, not prayers, not temples, just silence, long enough for the whisper to enter. And when it does, remember, do not answer. Because once you speak, you are no longer speaking for yourself. You become the room. Yes. And the room never forgets.